wind howled like a wounded beast, tearing across the frozen plains of Wyoming. Snow came down in hard, slanting sheets that erased the horizon and swallowed the road whole. A single wagon creaked along that endless white, the wooden wheels half buried in the drifts. Inside, Anna Walker held the reins tight, her hands red and raw beneath frayed gloves. 3 small faces huddled behind her beneath a threadbare blanket: Ethan, Luke, and Sam. Her whole world compressed into that rattling cart. Every breath they took turned to frost before her eyes. She had nowhere to go. The town behind her had slammed its doors shut. Mrs. Hensley, keeper of the only boarding house in Dry Creek, had looked her up and down, seen the worn black dress, the absence of a man beside her, and said coldly, "I don't house widows traveling alone. Not with children, not in my establishment." Anna had pleaded, offered her last dollar, her wedding ring. But the woman's gaze never softened. That night, with the wind already rising, Anna gathered what little she owned and left. Pride had kept her standing, but pride couldn't keep her sons warm. Now, as the storm thickened, her resolve began to crack. Ethan, her eldest, wrapped an arm around his brothers, trying to act brave. Luke was shaking, his teeth chattering. Little Sam whimpered softly, his lips blue. Anna whispered, "Hold on, baby, hold on." But her voice trembled as much as her hands. The wagon jolted, the horse stumbling. She thought she saw something ahead. A shadow. A figure moving through the snow. She blinked against the wind, unsure if her eyes played tricks. Then a man stepped out, wrapped in a dark coat and fur hat, snow-caked in his beard. "Turn that wagon around," he shouted over the storm. "You'll die out here." Anna's heart jumped. The voice was rough, the tone commanding, but not cruel. She tightened her grip on the reins. "We can't," she yelled back. "They won't take us in." The man moved closer, his eyes narrowing as he saw the children. For a moment he said nothing, only scanned the horizon behind her, the direction of Dry Creek, and then the small, half-frozen faces in the wagon. "How far are you planning to get before sundown?" Anna met his gaze. "Far enough," she said, though she didn't believe it herself. The man exhaled, long and heavy, and then motioned toward the trees. "My cabin's a mile that way. There's a barn, firewood, food. You come or you don't, but if you stay out here you won't see morning." Something in his tone, gruff certainty without pity, made her believe him. She hesitated only a moment before flicking the reins. The man walked ahead, guiding the horse through the snow like someone who'd done it all his life. By the time they reached the cabin, night had fallen. The structure loomed out of the white, solid logs, smoke curling from a chimney, and beside it, a small barn. Anna helped the boys down. Her limbs were numb. She barely felt her feet. The man opened the door, and a wave of heat washed over her. "Get them near the fire," he said. She obeyed, too tired to argue. Inside was plain but sturdy. Rough-hewn furniture, a stone hearth glowing with coals, and a smell of wood smoke and something faintly metallic. Tools, perhaps. The man busied himself at the stove, silent except for the crackle of fire and the occasional clink of iron. When he finally turned, his expression was unreadable. "Name's Jack Tanner," he said. "You and your boys can stay till the storm lets up. I'll sleep in the loft." Anna nodded, clutching her sons. "Thank you, Mr. Tanner. I'll cook, clean, whatever you need. I won't be a burden." "Didn't say you would," he muttered, then turned back to the stove. She noticed through a small window 2 grave markers just beyond the trees. Fresh snow lay smooth over them, but the shapes were unmistakable. Something in Jack's shoulders, the way he carried his silence, told her those graves were not old. The boys thawed quickly, their color returning. Sam, curious even in exhaustion, wandered toward a wooden shelf lined with small carvings, horses, birds, even a tiny rocking chair. Jack caught him looking and said quietly, "You can touch 'em. They were my boys." Anna's breath caught. She looked toward the graves again, then back at Jack. His eyes had gone distant, fixed on the flames. No more words were exchanged that night. When the children fell asleep on a blanket near the fire, Anna stayed awake, staring at the shadows crawling across the floorboards. Who was this man? Why live alone out here, where the cold could swallow you whole? Yet she felt something steady in his presence, something that quieted the fear clawing at her chest. Outside, the wind screamed against the walls, but inside the cabin there was warmth. Fragile, borrowed, but real. Jack poured water into a tin cup and set it beside her without meeting her eyes. "You'll need strength," he said simply. "Thank you," she murmured. He nodded once and stepped outside into the storm, perhaps to check the barn, perhaps to escape his own thoughts. Through the doorway, she saw him pause at the graves, brushing snow from the wooden crosses. The gesture was slow, reverent. Anna pulled the blanket tighter around her boys. She knew nothing of this man, except that he'd saved their lives. Still, as she listened to the wind fade and the fire pop, a strange feeling settled in her chest. Not safety, not yet, but the faint echo of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The storm raged for 2 more days. Jack brought in firewood, milked the cow, and kept to himself. Anna cooked what little food there was, grateful for the warmth, though uneasy under his quiet watch. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost apologetic, as if every word cost him effort. Once, when Ethan offered to help with the chores, Jack only said, "Mind your fingers. Axe'll take 'em clean off if you're not careful." Yet by the 3rd night, the air inside the cabin softened. The boys laughed as Sam dropped a wooden horse into the ashes and Jack fished it out with a poker, grumbling but smiling faintly. Anna caught that moment and held it close, proof that even in a place built from grief, life could still flicker. She didn't yet know that this small act of mercy, this brief crossing of paths, would alter every course that lay ahead. For her, for her sons, and for the man haunted by ghosts he couldn't bury. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, something fragile began to thaw. The snow didn't let up for another week. By then, the cabin had become both refuge and cage. Each day passed with the same rhythm. Jack chopping wood outside, Anna cooking by the stove, the boys exploring corners of the cabin as if they were mapping a world. The storm had trapped them together, forcing a kind of intimacy neither sought but both needed. Jack Tanner moved through the house with quiet precision, as though every sound was a memory he didn't want to disturb. He woke before dawn, his boots creaking softly on the wood floor, the smell of cold and pine clinging to him. Sometimes, when Anna thought he was outside, she'd see him at the window, staring at the 2 graves behind the cabin, his wife Claire and son Matthew, gone 3 winters past to a fever that tore through the valley. He never spoke their names, but grief clung to him like smoke. Anna, too, carried ghosts. When she closed her eyes, she still saw her husband Tom Walker, buried under a collapsed mine outside Rollins. His death had taken more than his life. It had stripped her of standing, of security, of the fragile respect women in town clung to. In Dry Creek, pity turned to judgment quickly. She'd tried to endure the whispers, but when the church board refused her work and Mrs. Hensley turned her away, Pride had become her only weapon. Now pride was all that stood between her and despair. At first, Jack and Anna barely spoke. Their conversations were transactional. Firewood, food, the boys. When Luke fell sick one night with fever, Anna sat by his side till dawn. Jack appeared silently, holding a cup of willow bark tea. "Helps with the heat," he said. She hesitated, then took it. "Thank you," she murmured. "You don't owe us this." Jack's eyes flicked toward the sleeping boy. "Don't owe nobody. Just don't like burying kids." Then he left, the door closing softly behind him. After that, something subtle shifted. Jack began bringing extra kindling to the hearth. Anna started mending his torn shirts without being asked. When Sam dropped a plate and burst into tears, Jack crouched down and said gently, "No harm done, kid. Plates don't cry." The boys' laughter echoed, thin but pure, and for a moment, the cabin didn't feel so cold. Still, tension lingered beneath the quiet. Anna couldn't quite trust the man who spoke so little, whose eyes seemed to hold storms of their own. And Jack, though grateful for the warmth of family life returning to his cabin, found himself wary of what it stirred in him. The sound of laughter where silence had been his companion. One evening, as the wind eased and the sky glowed blue with moonlight, he caught himself watching Anna brush her hair by the fire. Her face, tired but calm, glowed in the light. She looked up suddenly, catching his gaze. For a heartbeat, neither looked away. Then Jack turned sharply toward the door, muttering something about checking the horses. Ethan, the eldest, noticed. He watched Jack with suspicion at first, the stranger who had taken them in. But he also saw how Jack split logs so his mother wouldn't have to, how he made sure the boys had the best blankets. One morning, Ethan followed him outside, wanting to learn how to chop wood. Jack handed him the axe, wordless, and stood back. When the boy's first swing barely dented the log, Jack only said, "Again, this time with your legs." By sundown, Ethan had managed to split one clean piece. Jack clapped his shoulder. "Not bad. You'll do." It wasn't much, but to a boy starved for a father's approval, it meant everything. That night, Anna found Ethan asleep by the fire, the wooden horse Jack had carved for Sam resting beside him. She covered him with a blanket, her heart twisting. These small gestures, kindnesses without words, were beginning to build something fragile, dangerous. She'd promised herself she wouldn't depend on another man, not after watching her husband's debts and failures ruin them. But here, in the hush of winter, the loneliness was a living thing, and Jack Tanner's silence was the only sound that didn't hurt. One evening, the storm finally broke. The sky cleared, sharp and black, stars spilling over the world like broken glass. Jack stood on the porch, staring out at the white fields, when Anna joined him, her shawl pulled tight. "It's beautiful," she said softly. He nodded, not taking his eyes off the horizon. "Dangerous, too. Pretty things usually are." She glanced at him, sensing a truth in those words that went beyond the snow. "You speak like a man who's learned that the hard way." He hesitated. Then, almost to himself, he said, "My wife used to stand here just like this. Said the snow made her feel clean again. I didn't believe her till she was gone." Anna didn't know what to say, so she didn't. They stood there in silence, two broken souls watching the night. In the days that followed, the boys grew stronger, their laughter filling corners that had known only quiet. Anna began to hum when she cooked, small tunes from her childhood that warmed the air. Jack, though still guarded, found himself listening from the doorway, drawn against his will to the sound. He'd built his life around solitude, thinking it was safer that way. But safety, he was beginning to realize, was not the same as peace. One morning, while collecting firewood, Anna found a faded photograph tucked behind a stack of logs. Jack with a woman and a little boy. The woman's smile was bright, her eyes alive with mischief. The boy sat on his father's shoulders, laughing. It was a portrait of everything Jack had lost. She set it carefully on the table by the hearth. That evening, when Jack noticed it, his face went pale. "You shouldn't have touched that," he said quietly. "I wasn't prying," Anna replied. "I just didn't think something that beautiful should be hidden away." For a moment, he looked like he might yell, but he didn't. Instead, he sat down heavily, his gaze locked on the photo. "They're buried out back," he said finally. "Claire and Matthew. Fever took them before I could fetch the doctor." His voice cracked then, barely audible. "I buried them myself." Anna swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "Don't be." I stopped believing in sorry. That night, long after the children were asleep, Anna stared into the dying fire. For the first time, she saw Jack not as a stranger or savior, but as a man carrying wounds that mirrored her own. She knew this uneasy peace between them couldn't last. Not once the snow melted and the roads reopened. But for now, in this small pocket of the world, they were bound by something stronger than survival. Outside, the moon hung low, silvering the snow and the two graves beneath it. Inside, two hearts, tired, scarred, and searching, began, against all reason, to beat in the same quiet rhythm. By mid-February, the thaw began. The snow softened, dripping from the eaves like melted glass, and for the first time in months, the trail into Dry Creek was clear. Anna stood at the window of the cabin, her hands resting on the sill, watching the sun glint off the fields. "It's time," she said quietly. "We'll need flour, salt, medicine for Sam's cough." Jack looked up from the table where he was mending a harness. "You going alone?" he asked. "Just into town. We'll be back before dark." "People'll talk," he said. Anna met his gaze, a faint, defiant smile on her lips. Let them. When she arrived in Dry Creek with her 3 boys, heads turned. The blacksmith paused mid-swing. The general store clerk's eyes narrowed, and 2 women standing by the well exchanged whispers. Anna felt every stare like a thorn against her skin. Inside the store, the atmosphere was colder than the wind outside. Mr. Lyle, the shopkeeper, glanced from her to the boys, then said in a tone too casual to be kind, "Heard you been staying out by Tanner's place." Anna's hand stilled over the counter. "We had nowhere else," she replied simply. Lyle gave a dry chuckle. "Guess you found yourself some company then." Before she could respond, another voice cut through the air. "That'll be enough, Lyle." It was Hank Miller, the blacksmith, a broad, solid man with soot on his hands and decency in his eyes. He nodded at Anna. "You take what you need, Mrs. Walker. Put it on my account." The kindness in his voice made her throat tighten. She thanked him quietly and left, the boys clutching the supplies close. But as she stepped outside, she felt it, the weight of judgment pressing in from every direction. By sundown, rumors had spread faster than prairie fire. A widow shacking up with a man alone in the woods. No preacher, no papers, no shame. By the next Sunday, Reverend Collins thundered from the pulpit about sin and temptation, about women of weak virtue leading good men astray. No names were spoken, but every soul in Dry Creek knew who he meant. Silas Grayson, the richest landowner in the county, nodded along in the front pew, his smile tight with satisfaction. He had reason to see Jack fall. Jack Tanner's land bordered his own, and the water rights that ran through it were worth a fortune. At his table that night, Grayson leaned back in his chair, swirling whiskey in his glass. "Reputation's a fragile thing," he told the Reverend, who sat across from him, pale and uneasy. "You can't own a man like Tanner, but you can make him unwelcome enough to break him. Then his land'll come cheap." Collins frowned. "I serve the Lord's will, not your pocket." Grayson's smile widened. "Then let's pray his will and mine happened to agree." A week later, a deputy rode out to Jack's cabin, delivering an official notice stamped by the town council. Anna Walker's presence is deemed indecent and a threat to public morality. She is to vacate immediately or face legal action. Anna read the words twice, her vision blurring. Jack took the paper from her hands, read it once, and then tossed it into the fire. "They can come say it to my face," he muttered. But the damage had already begun. When Anna next rode into town, no one spoke to her. Mothers pulled their children aside. The grocer refused her money. Even Hank Miller, though still friendly, warned softly, "They're stirring trouble, Anna. Grayson's pushing this hard. He wants Jack's land." That night, Jack sat outside on the porch, carving another horse for Sam. Anna joined him, her shawl pulled tight. "Maybe I should leave," she said finally. "It's not right you getting dragged into this." He didn't look up from the wood. "You think it's about right and wrong? Grayson's been trying to run me off that land for years. You just gave him a story to twist." He paused, setting down the knife. "I won't let him win." She stared at him, unsure if it was pride or something deeper that fueled his defiance. "You don't owe me this fight." "Maybe not," he said, meeting her eyes. "But I'm damn tired of letting other men tell me what I can and can't live for." The next morning, he hitched up the wagon and rode into Dry Creek. The church bell was ringing. People were gathered on the green, Reverend Collins standing before them, sermon half finished. When Jack stepped forward, silence rippled through the crowd. "You got something to say, Reverend?" he called out. Collins hesitated, clutching his Bible. "This town has standards, Mr. Tanner. We can't turn a blind eye to immorality." Jack's voice cut through the air like a blade. "You mean kindness, shelter, feeding hungry children? That what passes for sin now?" Grayson pushed to his feet, face flushed. "You're protecting a harlot, Tanner, and everyone here knows it. She'll ruin you same as she ruined her husband." The crowd gasped. Jack's jaw tightened, his hand twitching toward the knife on his belt. But he didn't draw it. Instead, he took a step closer, his eyes burning cold. "Say his name again, Grayson. Say it one more time, and I'll give you something worth whispering about." For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Collins raised a trembling hand. "Violence won't solve this." Jack turned toward the people. "You all sit in that church every Sunday talking about mercy and charity. But when a woman's freezing to death with her kids, you'd rather gossip than lend a hand. Maybe I ain't the one who ought to be confessing." The silence that followed was thick as tar. Some looked away, others shifted uncomfortably. Grayson's face darkened with rage, but he saw what Jack saw. The crowd wasn't with him, not completely. A few men nodded quietly. Hank Miller stood near the edge, arms crossed, watching. Jack mounted his horse, his voice carrying over the wind. "Anna Walker stays. Anyone with a problem can come to me." Then he rode out, leaving the murmurs of the crowd in his wake. Back at the cabin, Anna waited by the window, her heart pounding. When Jack returned, she rushed outside. "What did you do?" she asked, breathless. "Told the truth," he said simply, dismounting. She shook her head. "You don't understand. They'll hate you for this." He met her eyes, his voice steady. They already did. That night, he began building, hammering boards, sawing timber from the old barn. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Making a room for the boys," he said. "If we're to be damned, might as well make it comfortable." Anna laughed softly, the sound breaking the tension like sunlight through cloud. It was the first real laugh she'd given in months. Jack smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth twitching. "About time I heard that." Outside, the stars burned cold and bright. Inside the cabin, hammers echoed, defiance ringing louder than the gossip that sought to crush them. For the first time, Anna realized she wasn't running anymore. She was standing still, fighting even, beside a man who refused to bow. And though the world beyond their walls was turning against them, something fierce and unyielding had begun to take root between them. Not just survival, but belonging. The first snow came late that year, thick, wet flakes that melted when they touched the earth. But by the second week of March, the storm had turned brutal. The wind screamed down from the mountains, carrying with it walls of white that swallowed fences, trees, and sky, until there was nothing left but a world of ice and silence. Jack had seen blizzards before, but this one felt different. Angrier, more merciless, as if the land itself were testing them. By dusk, the cabin was sealed tight. The windows shuttered. The fire stacked high. Anna moved quietly, wrapping blankets around the boys, tucking them close near the hearth. Sam's small hand clutched the wooden horse Jack had carved weeks ago. His thumb rubbed the smooth surface in his sleep. Jack watched her from across the room, her calm, steady movements, the way her hair caught the light from the fire, how she never complained even when her eyes betrayed exhaustion. She looked like someone who had spent her whole life carrying the weight of storms. Outside, the wind howled, battering the walls with the force of a fist. Snow leaked through the cracks despite all Jack's efforts to seal them. He threw another log into the fire and said quietly, "It's going to be a long night." Anna nodded without looking up. "We've had longer." Her voice carried something heavy beneath its calm. Jack hesitated, then asked, "You ever tell your boys about their father?" She froze for a moment, her hand stilling over the blanket. "Not much to tell," she said. "He was a miner, hard worker, good man." Her eyes flicked toward the flames. "The mine collapsed one spring morning. He never came out." Jack said nothing. The fire crackled between them. After a moment, Anna continued, her tone low, distant. "I waited for weeks. The company men said they couldn't dig that deep. It was too dangerous. They told me to take what was left of his wages and move on. So I did." The silence stretched, heavy with ghosts. Jack finally spoke. "I lost my family to fever. My wife, Claire, and my boy, Matthew. It started with a cough. I thought I could handle it. I didn't go for help soon enough. By the time I did, they were both gone." He rubbed his hands over his face, his voice rough. "I buried them out back. Couldn't leave the place after that. Guess I was scared to forget them." Anna looked up at him, eyes glistening in the firelight. "You think burying yourself with them is remembering?" Jack's jaw tightened. "You don't know what it's like to wake up every morning and hear the sound of a voice that's not there anymore." Her voice softened. "Maybe I do." The wind shrieked outside, rattling the shutters so hard that the boys stirred in their sleep. Anna rose and crossed the room, helping Jack brace the door. Their hands brushed as they worked, rough, calloused, trembling slightly from the cold. When the gust passed, they didn't step apart. For a long moment, they just stood there, listening to the storm pound against the world beyond their walls. Jack's voice broke the quiet. "You ever stop running, Anna?" She looked up at him, startled. "Running?" He nodded. "From the way folks look at you. From what they think you are." Her mouth opened, then closed again. She turned toward the fire, her profile lit in amber. "If I stop running, I have to face what's behind me." "And what's that?" "Fear," she whispered. "That I can't keep my boys safe. That no matter how far we go, the world will still take what it wants from us." Jack stepped closer. "You've kept them alive through worse than this. You think that's fear, that's strength." Her breath caught. "And you? You think hiding out here, living with ghosts, that's strength?" The words cut deeper than either expected. Jack's shoulders tensed, but instead of anger, what rose inside him was a kind of release, a breaking open. "Maybe it's cowardice," he said quietly. "Maybe I just didn't think I deserved to live after them." The fire popped, sending sparks into the air. Anna turned to face him fully. "You think guilt honors them? It doesn't. It just kills what's left of you." Her voice trembled, though her eyes didn't. For the first time, Jack saw not just the woman who'd survived everything, but the one still carrying her pain like a second skin. "I keep thinking," she said, her words barely above a whisper. "If I'd begged harder, maybe they would have gone back for him. Maybe my boys wouldn't have had to see me cry every night. Maybe." Her voice broke. Jack reached out, his hand hesitating before resting gently on her shoulder. "You can't fix what's gone, Anna." She met his gaze, tears welling but unshed. "Then what's left to fix?" Jack didn't answer. Instead, he did the only thing that felt true. He pulled her into his arms. For a moment, she resisted, her body stiff. But then the walls she'd built for so long began to crack. She let herself lean against him, her forehead pressed to his chest, her breath trembling against the fabric of his shirt. He held her as though she were something fragile, something he'd been afraid to touch until now. Outside, the storm roared on, blinding and merciless. But inside, there was a different kind of quiet, a stillness that felt alive. Hours passed. The boys slept. The wind beat against the cabin, but never broke through. Jack and Anna sat side by the fire, neither speaking. Her head rested lightly on his shoulder. His hand lingered over hers, rough against soft. At some point, she whispered, "You're not alone anymore, Jack." He turned slightly toward her, the faintest smile breaking through the sorrow. "Neither are you." Their eyes met in the firelight, tired, haunted, but unflinchingly real. And then, without hesitation or question, he leaned in, brushing his lips against hers. The kiss was quiet, almost hesitant, more like a promise than a claim. When they pulled apart, the room felt changed, warmer, brighter, the storm outside suddenly distant. The next morning, the world lay buried in snow. Trees bent under white weight, fences vanished beneath drifts. But the cabin still stood, smoke curling from the chimney. Inside, the fire burned low, casting a golden glow across their faces as dawn crept through the shutters. Anna stirred first, her hand resting over Jack's. He opened his eyes, saw her smile, soft, uncertain, but real. Outside, the storm had broken. Inside, something else had begun. For the first time in years, Jack Tanner felt the faint pulse of life returning. Not through words or prayers, but through the simple act of holding on to someone who refused to give up. And for Anna Walker, who had run from every place that told her she didn't belong, the cabin no longer felt like someone else's refuge. It felt like the beginning of home. When the thaw came, so did the reckoning. The snow melted fast that April, swelling the rivers and flooding the lowlands. With the change in season came riders, men carrying official papers, threats wrapped in seals and signatures. Jack found them nailed to his fence posts one morning. Eviction notice, trespassing on county land, guardianship review for minors pending. He read the words slowly, his chest tightening. Someone had gone to the county seat. Someone had filed claims against Anna, against her boys. Jack didn't need to guess who. By noon, Reverend Collins arrived, hat in hand, eyes cast down like a man pretending mercy. "This isn't personal, Jack," he said softly. "The council's made its decision. Mrs. Walker's arrangement can't continue. The law says her children must be placed where they'll be properly cared for." Jack's jaw tightened. "You calling me improper?" Collins sighed. "I'm calling this situation untenable. The council believes you're taking advantage of her." That word, advantage, cut deeper than any blade. Jack took a slow step forward, his voice low. "You tell Grayson I'll see him buried before he takes that land." Collins paled. "This isn't about land, it's about—" "Don't lie to me, preacher. It's always about land." The Reverend turned to go, his face heavy with shame. "You can fight the law if you like, but it'll break you just the same." When he rode off, the sound of his horse faded into the wind. Jack stood alone at the gate, fists clenched, the papers crumpled in his hand. Inside, Anna was waiting. She could read the truth on his face before he spoke. "They're coming for us, aren't they?" He nodded. "Grayson's pushing the county. He wants the land, and he's using you to get it." Anna's voice trembled but didn't break. "What will you do?" Jack looked at her, at the boys sleeping near the fire. He wanted to say fight. He wanted to promise safety. But all that came out was silence. That silence lasted through the night. And the night after. Anna packed quietly, folding the boys' shirts, gathering the food she could. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. It was as though she'd already expected this ending. On the third night, she stood in the doorway, her shawl wrapped tight, the boys waiting by the wagon. "You don't have to go," Jack said, his voice rough. "Yes, I do." "Anna, you think staying here makes me brave? It makes me your weakness. And if you can't stand in front of those men and say otherwise, then we both know what this is." He stepped forward. "That's not fair." She looked at him, her eyes glistening but steady. "Neither is life, Jack. You taught me that." Then, before he could speak again, she pressed something into his hand, his late wife's wedding ring. "You gave me this for protection," she said. "But it's not mine to keep." The ring felt cold against his palm. "I meant it," he whispered. "Then you should have said it when it mattered." Her words broke something inside him that even the blizzard hadn't touched. By the time the sun rose, the wagon was gone, the trail already half covered in frost. The cabin felt larger without them, emptier than the day he buried his family. Jack tried to work, mending fences, feeding the horses, but everything he touched felt hollow. The fire burned low that night, throwing long shadows across the walls. He sat in the silence, staring at the ring glinting in the dim light, until the weight of his failure finally pressed him to his knees. Days bled into each other. He drank. Not much at first, just enough to blur the edge of guilt. But soon the bottle stayed close at hand. The animals went hungry. The tools rusted. He stopped going to town. It was Hank Miller who found him like that. Slumped by the fire, the cabin thick with smoke and regret. "You look like hell, Tanner." Hank said, stepping inside without knocking. Jack didn't look up. Go home, Hank. Not till you hear me out. I ain't in the mood for sermons. Good. I ain't no preacher. Hank pulled up a chair, his boots creaking. You think you're the only man ever made a mistake? She left because you didn't fight, not because she stopped caring. There's a difference. Jack snorted. Doesn't matter now. She's gone. Then go after her. Jack turned sharply, eyes bloodshot. To what end? So I can fail her again? Hank leaned forward, his voice turning hard. You already failed her once by standing still. You plan to do it twice? Jack looked away. The fire crackled between them. Hank reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This here's a land deed, he said, placing it on the table. 40 acres north of the river. My land. I'm giving it to Anna Walker. You'll sign it over legal, make her a landowner. That way, Grayson and his cronies can't touch her or her boys. Jack stared at him. Why would you do that? Because someone ought to. Hank's tone softened. You forget, I knew your wife, Jack. Claire would have wanted you to stand for something again. Jack's voice cracked. You think this'll fix it? No, Hank said quietly. But it'll start something new. And that's the only way you'll ever forgive yourself. The words hung in the air. Slowly, Jack reached for the deed, tracing the ink with his thumb. The paper trembled in his hands. I don't know if I can face them, he admitted. You can, Hank said, standing. Because the man I knew wasn't a coward, just one who forgot what courage looked like. Maybe it's time you remembered. That night, Jack stayed awake long after Hank had gone. The whiskey bottle sat untouched. The fire burned steady. Outside, the spring wind rattled the shutters, carrying the scent of thawing earth and renewal. He laid the deed on the table, placed his wife's ring beside it, and stared at them both. Symbols of the 2 lives he'd failed to protect, and the one chance he had left to make things right. By dawn, he saddled his horse, packed a small bag, and rode toward town. The sun rose behind him, pale and cold, casting long shadows across the valley. Ahead lay the church, the courthouse, and every man who'd ever called him sinner, fool, or coward. He didn't care anymore. For the first time since the day his family died, Jack Tanner rode with purpose. He didn't ride for pride or vengeance, but for love. The quiet, steady kind that demands action instead of words. And as the wind swept across the plains, he whispered to himself, I'm coming for you, Anna. This time, I'll stand. The church bell tolled just as Jack Tanner rode into town. Its sound cut through the crisp morning air, solemn and final, like judgment itself. Sunday service was already underway. Wagons lined the dusty street, horses tied at the hitching posts, and voices carried faintly from within the white wooden chapel. Jack dismounted, his boots sinking into the mud from the spring thaw. He stood there for a moment, hat in hand, feeling every eye on him as he climbed the church steps. Inside, Reverend Collins was mid-sermon. And the wages of sin are not always seen in this life, but... The door creaked open, silencing the room. Heads turned. Jack Tanner filled the doorway like a storm cloud, hat low, coat dusted with road and wind. Sorry to interrupt, Reverend, he said, his voice steady, echoing across the pews. But there's something that needs saying before another word about sin gets preached. A murmur rippled through the congregation. Collins cleared his throat. Mr. Tanner, this is hardly... Jack didn't wait. He walked straight down the aisle, his spurs scraping the wood, and set a folded paper on the altar. This here, he said. is a signed and witnessed deed transferring 40 acres north of the river to Mrs. Anna Walker. Land, water rights, and full ownership. It's legal, binding, and blessed by God, far as I can tell. A gasp went through the room. Grayson, seated near the front, shot to his feet. "You can't do that. That land is mine to give," Jack interrupted, his eyes narrowing. "And I'm giving it to the woman you've been hounding since her husband died. You want to talk decency, Reverend? Let's start with that." Collins looked stricken. "Jack, please, this isn't the time." No, it's exactly the time," Jack said, his voice rising like thunder. "You all sit here talking about righteousness, while a widow and her children freeze in the hills because no one had the guts to stand up to men like Grayson." He turned to the crowd, his tone raw but steady. "You all know what he's been doing. The false claims, the threats, the letters to the county court. He tried to strip a woman of her dignity just to get her land. You tell me. Who's the sinner here?" Grayson's face reddened. "You have no proof?" Jack slammed a bundle of papers on the altar. "I got every letter you sent to the land office, signed and sealed. Hank Miller helped me collect them. Guess you forgot the blacksmith can read." Laughter, short, nervous, disbelieving, broke through the tension. Collins looked down at the documents, his lips tightening. "Is this true, Mr. Grayson?" Grayson stammered, then turned to the crowd. "You'll regret this, Tanner. You think giving her land will make you a hero? You're just digging your own grave." "Maybe so," Jack said softly. "But at least I'll be buried a man." For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of the lanterns. Then Hank Miller rose from his seat, stepping forward. "He's right," he said firmly. "We've all watched good folks get pushed out of this valley by greed and fear. Not today. One by one, others stood. Old men, ranch hands, a few women with tears in their eyes. The tide was turning. Grayson saw it and faltered. Then, like a beaten dog, he grabbed his hat and stormed out, slamming the church door so hard the walls shook. Jack exhaled slowly, his shoulders dropping as if the weight of years had finally lifted. Collins looked at him, torn between pride and shame. "What will you do now?" Jack adjusted his hat. "Find Anna," he said simply, "and tell her the truth. Our care." 2 days later, he found them. The trail led north through the hills, across thawing streams, and past the skeletal remains of a winter that had nearly killed them all. At dusk, he came upon an abandoned line shack, smoke curling from the chimney. He dismounted quietly, heart pounding. Anna stepped out as he approached, rifle in hand, her eyes wary until she saw his face. Then she froze. "Jack," he removed his hat. "I've been looking for you." Her voice trembled. "You shouldn't have come. Maybe not. But I needed to say what I couldn't before." He reached into his coat, pulling out the folded deed. "This is yours now. Land, title, water rights, all of it. No one can take it from you." She stared at it, disbelief flickering across her face. "Why?" "Because you deserve more than fear, more than what I gave you." He swallowed hard. "You were right, Anna. I was a coward. I thought silence could keep you safe, but all it did was break you. I can't change what I did, but I can damn well stand for you now." She looked at him for a long time, the wind tugging her shawl. The boys watched from the doorway, silent. Finally, she spoke, her voice low. "You think a piece of paper makes this right?" Jack shook his head. "No. But maybe it's a start." He held out his wife's ring, the one she'd returned to him. "You said it wasn't yours to keep. Maybe it's time it meant something new." Tears welled in her eyes. Slowly, she reached out, and closed his hand around the ring. "You don't need to give me this, Jack. I'm not giving it. I'm asking you to wear it." She hesitated, her breath catching. Then finally, she stepped closer, resting her forehead against his chest. "You took long enough," she whispered. He smiled, a small, broken smile that felt like home. "Had to make sure the world was ready for you first." Ethan, the eldest boy, spoke up from the doorway. "Are we going home now?" Jack looked at Anna, then back at the boy. "If your mama says so." Anna nodded, tears spilling freely now. "Yes," she said softly. "We're going home." Hot. 3 months later, spring blanketed the valley in green. The cabin stood tall again, rebuilt, expanded, alive with laughter and the smell of fresh bread. Jack and Anna married under the open sky, Hank Miller officiating with a grin. The townsfolk came too, some shy, some contrite. Mrs. Hensley brought pies. Reverend Collins offered a quiet apology and a blessing. Life didn't turn perfect. It never does. There were fences to mend, debts to pay, ghosts that still whispered in the dark. But there was peace, real peace. On a clear morning, Jack, Anna, and the boys walked to the little graveyard behind the cabin. They laid wildflowers on the graves of Claire and Matthew Tanner. Anna knelt beside him, her hand finding his. "They'd be proud of you," she whispered. He looked at her, at the sunlight in her hair, at the family they'd somehow built out of loss. "No," he said softly. "They'd be proud of us." As the wind moved through the grass, carrying the scent of wild sage and spring rain, the sound of children's laughter echoed across the land. And for the first time in years, Jack Tanner felt it. Not the ache of what he'd lost, but the quiet, steady warmth of what he'd found. Because home, he finally understood, wasn't a place you found. It was a place you built, with love, with courage, and with the grace to begin again. In the harsh heart of Wyoming, 2 broken souls found the strength to rebuild what the world had taken. Anna Walker, a widow shunned by her town, and Jack Tanner, a rancher haunted by grief, were bound first by survival, then by something deeper. Love born in silence and tested by fire. Their world judged them, condemned them, and nearly tore them apart. Yet each loss became a seed for courage. When Jack stood before the town to defend Anna's name and restore her freedom, he'd reclaimed his own humanity. When Anna forgave him, she turned sorrow into strength. Together, they built not the perfect life, but a real one. Messy, fragile, and filled with grace. In their laughter, in their scars, the land itself seemed to breathe again. For theirs was never a story about escape from loneliness, but about the faith to stay, to rebuild, and to love again. In the quiet after every storm, one truth remained. Home isn't given, it's made. End of article. Good night.